Well, good morning everyone, kia ora, and welcome to the public and staff who are here today and the media. And we will ask Councillor Donaldson to open our meeting with the council prayer.
E noi tātou. E te atua kaharawa ko koe te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātauranga. Mana kitia mai mātou o pononga I tēnei rā, e mahine I a mātou mahi, mō te painga o ngā tangata o te kaunihera o Rotorua. Takua mai kia tau te rangi Māori ai, ki runga I a mātou I ngā wā katoa, ko ihu karaiti hoki tō mātou ariki, Amini. Almighty God, who alone is the leader of all mankind and the fountain of all knowledge, send thy blessing upon us, your servants, this day as we strive to do all things good for the betterment of the people of the Rotorua district. May we be tolerant in ourselves at all times through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Apologies for lateness, Mayor Chadwick, and apologies, I need an early departure. My flight this afternoon to Sydney's cancelled due to foul weather, so they've put me on an earlier one, so I will need to leave at 11:30. So apologies for that. I had scheduled it so that I would be here for the full meeting, but the weather has done what the weather does.
Page 8, number 6, item 2, recommendation number 1. I'd like to abstain.
Would you like to read it?
Stopping of part of Westbourne Avenue and disposal, that the council stop the part of Westbourne Avenue as shown in attachment number 1.
That's just minutes.
That's just minutes.
We're not voting on it. It's been voted on.
Okay, I thought you approved the minutes, so I'm just voting against that particular part.
Abstaining.
Are there any urgent items on the agenda? There's been none. So now we'll go to the confirmation of council minutes of the 27th of September. Do I have a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the council meeting on the 27th of September? Seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
I do not want to take part in approving recommendation number 1, Madam Chair.
Where's that?
On page 8. On the minutes.
You're only approving the minutes.
Okay, I was just protecting myself, that's all.
No, we are approving minutes. It's not a vote. Just to clarify. Yeah, if Councillor Gould, in the minutes, it's already noted that you removed yourself from the vote. So the meeting as the vote was held. Right, we move now to recommendations of other committees, page 23. I need a mover and a seconder that recommendations from other committees be received. Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Tapsell. All those in favour please say aye. Contrary? Carried. And we'll move now separately through those recommendations. Recommendation 1, review of the policy register. The Council approved the review of the policy register, including the changes to existing policies as amended. We had that discussion at committee meeting, and that Council policies, including deletion of policies, is programmed within the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee's work plan. So that's your attachment 1B. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Good. Seconded, Councillor Kent. Is there any discussion? I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Now the second motion, property disposal motion. A mover and a seconder that council adopt the property disposal policy as amended, so those amendments were included in attachment 2. Thank you. Moved councillor Kent, seconded councillor Donaldson. Is there any discussion? There appears to be none. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Recommendation 3, transfer of Thermal Holiday Park to Ngāti Whakaue. Attachment 3, I have a mover, seconded councillor Gould. Are there any questions? There appear to be none. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. We move now to recommendation 4. That's the review of the General Bylaw 2011. That council resolved that in accordance with 206.3 of the Public Places section of the General Bylaw 2001, the first schedule to the Public Places section of General Bylaw 2011, showing the areas where people shall not ride a skateboard, be replaced with a replacement map as attached to this report. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Councillor Kent, seconded Councillor Hunt. Is there any discussion? I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Recommendation 5. I need a mover that the spatial plan, the special consultative procedure hearings format be approved. Councillor Gould moved, seconded Councillor Hunt. Is there any discussion? Councillor Tapsell.
Also, just a comment on the wonderful videos that are now online for our public to see. So a few of the portfolio leads and yourself have done these amazing, informative, very short, tried to make it 1-minute videos. So those can be found on our website, and just to strongly encourage people to look for those, and also like the council Facebook page to keep up with updates. I think it's a really innovative way to do it, and already in the first couple of days we've had some very good responses. So just like to thank and congratulate staff on that wonderful idea.
It's really understanding what's behind this document, which is a very pivotal document for us going forward. I'm going to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. So we look forward to the invitations to get out to speak to any groups as we outlined, and then councillors will be asked if they wish to be present. We move now to recommendation 6, the New Zealand-China Mayoral Forum Business Case for Conference Attendant. Do I have a mover? Councillor Gould, seconder, Councillor Tapsell. All those in, is there any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Just on that, there is a mayor coming to Rotorua Boys High on Friday of one of the visiting provinces that will be at the China Forum in Wellington, so I'll pop down to meet him. They've got an education exchange between the two schools, so there you go, the relationships are starting to build. This Friday. We move now to a mover and a seconder that the following recommendations, and these have come from the Resource Management Act Policy Committee, who have held meetings on the 8th and 22nd of August. So really it's come to us, and that's the right process. It's been through their committee process. Recommendation 1, Plan Change 5, Signs and Miscellaneous Changes. That Plan Change 5, Signs and Miscellaneous Changes, including the Section 32 report as detailed in Attachment 5B, be publicly notified, and that the addendum to Plan Change 5 subdivision connectivity provisions including the Section 32 report as outlined in Attachment 5, be publicly notified. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Donaldson. Now, Henry, you're going to present to us. Thank you. So we've got clarity before we vote.
Good morning, Madam Mayor and councillors. And look, I'll just give a very brief introduction to these changes that have been recommended by the RMA Policy Committee. And I think probably the first thing I'd like to say is the fact that these changes actually appear quite simple is really quite a credit to that policy committee. They've been working through an incredibly complex legal area and have come up with changes that are simple and look to me to achieve the goals they were looking for. So big credit to Councillor Hunt and Councillor Kent and Gina Mohi. This is really impressive. So the couple of issues that we're going to deal with in the one paper, and I'll leave it to both Ella Yonker and Kate Darm to take you through the paper before I'm sure Councillors Hunt and Kent will step in, are to do with signs and to do with holiday homes. And fundamentally the issue that we're trying to address with the signage policy is to improve the visual appearance of the district and essentially introduce more tools to reduce visual clutter. And probably the important thing to say about both changes is that they're not actually significant changes to what's in the plan at the moment, but what they do is introduce greater certainty and more consistency, which it makes it much easier to actually work the plan. So fundamentally the goal with the holiday homes one is to look at a better way of managing effects that we think are over and above really what could reasonably be expected in a residential area. So the two intents of both are to get the consistency and certainty in the signage area, which is aimed at really the visual appearance in the district, and with the holiday homes it's aimed to give clearer tools to actually manage effects that really are over and above what could be expected in those places. And the only other thing I'd say before I hand over to Ella first would be, it probably doesn't need to be said, but just really being conscious as councillors that we're about to enter into a statutory process. This decision's about sending proposals out to the public for engagement and to get their views, but being conscious that you are in a statutory process and watching those principles around natural justice and ensuring you don't take a predetermined position before the process has worked through. But I'll hand over to Ella to take through a short presentation on the signs.
Hi. Good morning. Henry so eloquently explained, I think I must stop there while you're all convinced. See if this works. Oops. Carol? Okay. Oh, it's jumped too far. So as Henry has explained, the aim of the signs changes to the district plan is to reduce visual clutter. And if you look at the bottom picture or photo there, you will see a multi-sign signboard. So that is typically one of the ideal ways to do that. So we don't need to have 4 different signs of different sizes and shapes and colors that kind of changes the whole amenity of the area. And the other aspect is improving amenity in general. So if you look at that sign at the top, you will see the color kind of fades into the background. It gives a really nice design, simple words. Although it is quite a big sign in that case, it still fits in within the bigger picture of the rural background and the purpose of that activity and the character of that zone. So the district plan approach can be summed up in pretty much 2 things, and that is we've classified all signs into 2 categories. The one is the site-related signs and the other one is the non-site-related signs. So site-related signs, as you can see in the photo, Aroma is only advertising the activity that's located on the site. So whether it's a permanent sign or a temporary sign, it will be permitted in the plan. So we've taken a very permissive approach to the majority of signs in the district. And obviously those will be subject to performance standards. So performance standards are only the basic things like the size of the sign, its color, design, reflectivity, and those kind of things. So the second approach is for non-site related signs. So that photo demonstrates activities that are not located on the site. So it's located somewhere else in town, all advertised in one place. And we all have our opinions on that over time. But I guess the point is we'd like to first assess the effects of those type of signs before either approving it or declining such an application. So for that reason, all non-site related signs will require consent. When a consent is lodged, it is assessed against assessment criteria. The assessment criteria, again, looks at similar aspects like we've discussed in the performance standards, but it will also look at things like cumulative effects. So if there's already 100 signs on one corner, you probably don't want one more. And then we've added new assessment criteria that wasn't previously in the plan, and we've added new objectives and policies to help guide decision makers. So you would say, well, if it's all the same as in the old plan, what has actually changed? So it's summarized in those 3 key points, is that the rules for non-site related signs now align more with the sensitivity and the character of the zone. Previously, some of them had a higher threshold to meet, whereas it should have been a lesser threshold and vice versa. So we fixed that up. And then we've also clarified in the definitions and performance standards to make it all very clear and easy to implement. And the new objectives, policies and assessment criteria help to guide the decision making. Previously it was a little bit hard for the consents team to sometimes reject applications or to enforce certain conditions on a consent because there weren't enough of those policies to really say that this is what the plan is requiring and that's why we're asking for that. So this is all just to make sure we get a better environmental outcome. Now, there are community information signs that previously hasn't quite fallen within the different definitions that were in the plan, so we've now created a new definition. So some of them we don't want, like for instance, your normal events. The majority of your non-site related signs relate to events, and we don't want them to have to come to us every time for a resource consent if they want to put up something for an event. So Council has got a new initiative to create this new multi-sign signboard for events. So to give you an idea on that photo, it's got a nice background. It's a good design. It's about 6 meters wide and 3 meters high. So people will, on the little grey box, be able to include the different advertisements from time to time. And from what I understand at this stage, it seems that will be free of charge as well. Then another way that we are trying to assist community so that with their advertisement is the council has donated a significant amount for the Around the Town app. You can go on the website to see a bit more about that. So local businesses and even like information groups like anti-violence and those kind of things, they can all go and advertise on those kind of signs, apps as well. And obviously council have got its own website as well. We also open to different advertisements. So in general on the signs, all I can say is we're a new era. We don't need to slap signboards everywhere across the district for all sorts of signs. The focus is more on allowing the site-related signs to enable businesses to advertise their activities without it having to compete with non-site related signs that get slapped on at the same time. So that's all on signs. And then we've got a few miscellaneous changes in the plan. The majority of them in the bottom list is quite minor, just cross-references added, a few corrections so that the maps and the and the schedules of the archaeological sites and notable trees are correct. Historic structures, nothing major, it's just one that has now been registered with Heritage New Zealand, so just to reflect that. So the top 3 changes are a little bit more, but it's mainly just to improve enforceability of the plan. So the old plan used to have temporary stockpiling as permitted activity, and that hasn't come through into the new plan, or operative plan. So we've just added that rule back in with some performance standards, and also then added criteria so that if they don't meet the performance standards, that it can be assessed and managed correctly. Parking of heavy vehicles in the residential zone, obviously nobody likes that, so it's just making sure that the provisions are ironclad so that we can enforce that in a better way. Subdivision connectivity provisions, that relates to when a subdivision occurs, to require that subdivision to provide an open-ended road, if I can put it that way, from which the next adjoining site can get access in future when that is being developed. So that the purpose of that is to ensure that communities are connected and that road networks are planned in a more holistic fashion. And that is me. Any questions?
Concerning signage, I take it that flashing sign on Lake Road and the ones on the corner of just up the Perry Springs Road, Old Taupo Road, require consent. Is that correct? The big ones on aluminium stands?
I just looked over at Jason Ward and he's nodded that yes, both of those required consent.
Okay. Now, signs on verandas. Your picture on the screen showed a cafe where they had a sign on the outside of the building. What about signs on verandas? Do they need a consent, or is that covered under their normal course?
Again, it will only depend whether it's site-related or non-site related. If it's site-related, it will be permitted, and there's certain performance standards around veranda, so that will be in Appendix 8 in that section, the track changes of the plan. If you look in Appendix 8 under the city centre performance standards, that will explain the type of things that they would need to comply with. For instance, you wouldn't have a massive sign that will block pedestrian traffic and those kind of things.
Okay, with your signage at the with the signs in town at the present moment, does that mean you need to go around and look at every single sign on buildings and make certain they comply?
No, generally most signs are either already complying, or if there's something that's out of the ordinary that was illegally done, then Kurtz will follow that up upon receiving a complaint on the issue. We don't generally go out and just try and find problems.
Okay. And you haven't covered signs on roads, because there's a case in Old Taupo Road where...
We just want the policy.
Signs on roads, I don't think have been covered sufficiently in your report.
Yes. Signs on roads are covered by the Signs on Road bylaw. So we have actually included a reference to that in the, I think, under the rules, as well as under the performance standards in the beginning of Appendix 8. You'll see there's a cross-reference to that so that people know that's covered not through the district plan but under the bylaw.
For other councillors, I'll take Councillor Bentley Stewart Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome back.
Madam Mayor, and thank you for tolerating my lateness today. Just a query with regard to signage. In the past, in a not too distant past either, we had a chap called Dennis Oliver that used to rigidly enforce the size of signs, the type of signs, the number of signs, where the signs were permitted. Do we not still have a person that does that? And secondly, is this signage rule going to have any effect on the mass painting out of some liquor outlets and dairies?
Under the performance standards, I might see if I can find that for you, but I think it's under the general performance standards in Appendix 8, the first section, as well as in the definition of sign. There's some provision around the colouring of buildings. Kate, if you can just see if you can find that one, but I can show you afterwards exactly. But the intent is for to control that. So the definition of sign includes whether you paint it on a building or or something attached to, it's still a sign, so it all will fall under the same performance standards.
This rule that you're trying to bring in,
Yeah.
will you have huge Coca-Cola signs painting out an entire window? Is that going to be acceptable?
Sorry? Councillor Kent would like to answer that.
If I can answer that, under the what we're proposing, a sign that's painted as in sort of a sponsored sign across a building or anything else classifies as any other sign, whether it's painted directly onto the building, onto the windows, or anything else, and is limited to 20% of the fascia. So you can only have 20% of the face, any one face of the building covered. Beyond that, it has to have proper full consenting.
Geez, that concerns me, but never mind. You're actually inhibiting the viability of businesses, but we'll live with it.
Councillor Stewart, this has gone through our
Sure.
Resource Management Committee on
I'm
2
still allowed to
meetings.
criticise things.
But it's not offices.
No,
That's
okay. Now, if you just go back to the communal sign, which I like the design, are they going to be big enough so people don't have to stop their vehicle to read it? Are they going to be illuminated? I know that Councillor Hunt over the years has advocated strongly that the 3 entranceways that we have signs that 1 you can read and 2 are illuminated. The other thing is, do the rules inhibit one of the biggest signs coming into Rotorua from State Highway 5 just past the Mamaku turn-off is the building, the sheep shed building, which has been over the years used by the chiefs and is currently being used by Te Oho Mai. In any way, are those types of things going to be inhibited via the new rules? And the other thing is, so the dairies in Ranulph Street that are currently painted 100% with the Coca-Cola logos and signage, they will not now comply and they will be asked to cut down to the 20%. I just want to get that clarified.
Just firstly, signs that have got existing use rights will not be, these rules won't apply to them. So it's only really for new signs and new buildings that will need to comply with that. In terms of that sign, sorry, what was your question again? I've got a few more.
Is it going to be big enough so people can read them without stopping?
The sign has to be, they've had negotiations with NZTA, so because it's going to affect traffic, so it has been approved from their point of view, so I'm sure that would have probably looked at the size of lettering to make sure that exactly what you've described does not happen.
Just a follow-up question, Your Worship. I noticed the sites are listed there on page 53. I thought one of the best ones would have been the roundabout at Nongataha, because that's where everyone else puts their signs. If you want a country and western or a jazz festival or whatever, the signs are always there.
I suppose the question is, where will the community notice boards be? Could you bring that back?
It's here.
Well, we don't know the site, so I've heard up to 8.
Yes, I would probably recommend that the Parks Departments are driving that process, and that process will go through a resource consent process, so all of those aspects still need to be tied down. They've identified, I see JP signalling he wants to say something there. You want to jump in?
Your Worship, I just Rob Keithley, Mr. Keithley is running that process, so it's coming out of his department. So it was a project that's been underway for almost a year actually, because there was some initial design work done, and you can see the visual of that. There was also a significant amount of discussion being led out of Mr. Keithley's department with various community groups about the most prominent and best locations, and then from there's also been subsequent discussions, as Ella has mentioned, with people like NZTA who have a particular issue around the safety on key roundabouts and areas like that. So Mr. Keithley, my understanding is looking to bring back to you a report which would clarify again the process that he's been through, some of those proposed sites, and actually start identifying the construction sites for your approval through the SPNF or O&M committee before we would go to a resource consent process.
Thank you, Worship, through you. Look, I'd like to agree with Henry and give a bouquet to the RMA Policy Committee. Signs portion of the district plan is occasionally referred to as the poison chalice, and I think they've done a splendid job, and I support the direction of the policy. I love it. My question is just a little pedantic one, because I was there at the blessing of Te Tipu Innovation Park on page 93, and it's in our document as the Scion Innovation Park. Now, while Scion is the controlling entity and the major entity in there, it's actually Te Tipu Innovation Park, and there are other entities based in there. So I just wonder if that little editorial could be added in. Otherwise, wouldn't you call the Waipa Business Park the Red Stag Investments Business Park, for example?
Yes, I think that's a minor change that we could do under the RMA.
Thank you. No, I too am pleased with the report, the report that you brought to us. And please, something is going to be done about the parking of heavy vehicles in the residential area. It's not only the parking, it's the revving up at 5 a.m. in the morning that wakes all the neighbours up. What kind of vehicles, I think I know what vehicles we mean, but I'd like to hear from you. What kind of vehicles are we talking about?
So if you look at the definition of heavy vehicles, that we've amended it a little bit. So the intent is to capture anything classed as a heavy vehicle by NZTA, but more specifically, even when they unload their truck, that it will still be classed as a heavy vehicle. Because we previously had problems with people leaving the trailer there and then driving off, and then it's not heavy vehicle anymore. So we've tightened that up.
Ah, very good.
Councillor Kent, you had a question?
No, I'd just like to congratulate the staff on the work that they've actually put into this. They've done an excellent job. We've had some very heated debate, and we've thrashed it out pretty thoroughly. And I think at this stage it's as close as we can possibly get it to what needs to go out to the public to get their feedback before we can do any fine-tuning at the end. But I encourage you all to support it.
My sport and recreation head on. These rules are supportive rather than being a big hammer. For example, if at Waipa the mountain biking people, because we're getting a lot of development going on in there, and they want a major sign at the entranceway, with a flashing thing through the middle of it saying today the World Championships for the BMX, day one or whatever, they're not going to be inhibited because that hasn't got existing usage rights. See where I'm coming from? I want to see a proactive sign, and I see this as a brilliant start to it. But site-related, major events, rather than seeing these scrappy bloody signs along the road saying major event happening, I mean, are horrible. So I just want to know these rules will not inhibit the innovation that will come forward with the developments that we're having. For example, when we get skate park up and running, a sign there saying this is where it is. We've always had a problem with the aquatic centre as well.
So, like I said previously, the site-related, so it's relating to the activity on the site, that is permitted, just obviously subject to performance standards.
I wonder if that is a clarification needed about we were looking at the entranceways, and what's on in Rotorua. Where would that be? On the community boards, or
if it is just an event, that will be on that community board that we've showed, or at the event.
Councillor Hunt.
I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Kent said, that this is ready to go out to the public. There will be further tweaks, and the benefit of the submission process, and I do hope people do submit constructively, and that will help us tweak and pick up anything we might have got or missed in order for us to have a policy that will be robust. It won't please everyone, but I'm pleased to hear Councillor Sturt support that it is an enabling policy, and it's really putting a level playing field to say that we love signs to tell us where to go, but we'd really like them in certain places and make it fair for everyone and to keep our city as beautiful as it is. So I look forward to that rolling review and that feedback when it comes in.
This is probably one of the first policy changes from the resource management, the big
second
ones.
one, the noise.
Second.
We've got the noise
that's
hearings
right.
coming up
Yep.
in a week's time.
But good process, isn't it? That it goes through that filter before it comes to us. I'm going to put that recommendation 1. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. And congratulations to the committee and staff for the clarity that we've had put to us today. And now I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder for Plan Change 6, holiday rentals. That Plan Change 6, holiday, I won't read it, it's up there. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded Councillor Gould. And now that is open for discussion. Henry or, no, yeah. Kate, thank you.
We've got a quick PowerPoint on holiday rentals. The issues very much come out of what was occurring in Tihiatonga last Christmas, with the key issues being noise and parties, car parking and overall amenity. So we've developed a plan change to try and address those issues. At the moment, on page 3 of the current rules within the district plan capture all holiday rentals irrespective. Sorry. Currently under the district plan, all holiday rentals are captured by the district plan rules. That makes it very difficult for council to enforce. So if you have someone coming, letting their house out for one night for 2 guests, that's captured by the current district plan rules. So the district plan has been proposed to address that issue with the district plan and to address the residential amenity issues that are occurring as a result. The plan change itself has been very, very simple. It's been developed by Sigma Consultants. What we're proposing is that no consent is needed if you let your house out for less than 12 guests or 12 or less guests, and car parking is provided on site, and there's a new standard that requires 1 car park per 4 guests. Resource consent will be required if you let your house out for more than 12 guests or if you have inadequate car parking. The rules will apply to the residential and rural zones. It won't affect the Lakes A zone, which is Okaraka and Tarawera, and that's simply because it's a different chapter of the district plan. The rules will apply to all, so these rules will apply to the existing operations in Tihiatonga. It's estimated based on the Bookabatch website that 8% of holiday rentals currently cater for more than 12 guests. So the majority of people will continue to operate, but they'll need to comply with the car parking and the noise rules in the district plan. But there'll be 8% that will either require resource consent or will need to reduce the numbers to 12 or less. With the plan change process, it's a reasonably complicated process, and it's the same process for both plan changes. So we'll go, if you approve it today, we're going to go out for public notification in November. That'll mean a public notice in the paper, an advert in the council magazine, and we'll also send a copy of the public notice to all out-of-district ratepayers. Anyone at all can make a submission. Submissions, we're looking to have them close on the 12th of January, and that's to ensure that we're not closing submissions just before Christmas and creating issues for people trying to quickly get a submission together. Yeah. Normally you're required to have 20 working days submission period, so we're extending that to be more generous. There's then a further submissions period, which is a limited range of people can make a further submission. Then hearings we're anticipating next year. Then it'll come back to council for a decision, and then there's an appeals process. So it's a long-winded, long process, but it's the start now. As you're probably all aware, we've got the rating policy for people that are renting out their houses for more than 100 days. And currently, Kurt's very active in terms of responding to complaints in terms of noise and car parking. And where appropriate, we're trying to take enforcement action against both landowners and occupants. The issue there in the past has been that we can only address occupants of holiday rentals. They move out a week later and then you've got the same issue. So we're trying to be more active in that space. And that's it.
Well, something that was of high community interest. So open for questions now. Councillor Tapsell, then Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ella, Henry and Kate, for your presentation and your work. I know it hasn't been easy coming to this conclusion. I think you've done an excellent job. But my question, I'd like to focus on the Lakes area. As the representative, council representative on the Community Lakes Board, it is an important issue to me, and we have been holding community meetings, and amongst it, of course, we've been discussing the holiday rentals. Now, I was a little bit concerned to see that Okareka and Tarawera, being part of the Lakes A zone, aren't included in this. So firstly, if you could please just explain what that would look like for them, because Okareka is pretty much the only lake that we were getting feedback from that it was an issue. And we actually, and I wanted to share that, we did have very strong communication back from the rest of the lakes area that this is actually not an issue within the areas. They have they either have or they're working on really good community policies to do that, even just leaflets on, you know, this is the way we would like you to do it. And they're feeling like they're quite self-managed in the way and are very happy with the way it is. And there was also concerns about the number of 12, because as you know, these holiday homes are the holiday homes. I think if my family went there, just immediate family will be well over 12. So just trying to make it fair in regards to all of the district. We do have a diverse district, and areas within the rural and the lakes area are much different to a Tiho Tonga or an average street here in the Rotorua urban city. So if you could please just address those issues for us to give us confidence.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay, so within the Lakes A is a separate chapter of the district plan. It's a very effects-based chapter. So to put a figure of 12 people into that chapter would be quite difficult. We're looking at reviewing the Lakes A chapter of the district plan later in the near to medium future. So changing the Lakes A chapter would be complicated. In addition to that, where am I going with this? So at the moment we can have Rotoiti and Rotorua being separately under the current district plan, and the other lakes, Okareka, Tarawera, etc., under the Lakes A. Where people are not compliant, when you've got holiday rentals within the Lakes A, you've still got rules in the Lakes A chapter of the district plan that control that, and that's based on vehicle movements.
I sort of get where Councillor Tapsell's going, that people who come into the region don't know the difference. They don't know we've got a Lakes A zone. So I suppose the consistency is, because these are people from out of town as well, we need a rule across, a little bit like motorhomes actually. You know, you don't know when you're driving through, you want consistency of approach. That's sort of where you're coming from. I know it goes out to the public and we'll get that feedback, I'm sure, but can you answer that? Councillor Kent, you've obviously been part of it on the resource
Yes, Your Worship.
Committee.
The issue is quite simply that the Lakes A zone is different in terms of the district plan. Because of timing and everything else and finalisation of the district plan. There will be a review of the Lakes A zone coming up, and we will be looking at that stage, but at this point in time the specific rules that we're looking at here don't apply to that zone because we have not reviewed that zone yet. All right?
So you
that doesn't mean to say we're not going to.
Yep.
It means we haven't got there yet, that's all. I also want to, just while I've got the floor, just clarify in people's minds something that Councillor Tapsell said. The idea of your family being more than 12 coming to a place exceeding the limit does not apply. And it's because it is only paying guests. We very carefully put in there the definition of a holiday rental, and I'll just read it so that everyone is clear on it. The use of a residential building, including temporary use of an established household unit, by paying guests for short-term holiday accommodation where the owner or manager is not resident on the site. So we very carefully excluded families and gatherings, and you can do what you like with your own property. That's not involved. But if you're going to let it out for money
Per person.
and there are going to be more than 12 people there, then the rules apply. If
Thank
it's
you.
less than 12 people, permitted activity.
Thank you, and thank you for the clarification that we will be getting to Lakeside Zone. Councillor Hunt?
The only thing I'd like to add is that it certainly gives a fairly clear indication to the Lakeside Zone that this is in the pipeline, and it gives them an opportunity to consider whether they're at the above 12 and they'll need a consent, or whether they'll actually stay under that threshold and be permitted. We were unable to address Lakeside in the last rolling plan due to the timing issue of when it was established, and depending on the submissions we get back, and depending on the level of issue this is, or this continues to be, may well indicate how quickly we get to Lakeside or not, because it is only one aspect of that plan, and it's a pretty large issue to deal with.
Thank you for that. We're getting there. It's hard when you haven't been part of the committee, but it's great to see the process of the committee. Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Worship. Just a question of process for Kate, and again, you know, I think this is a really pragmatic approach to the problem that we had, particularly in Te Hia Tonga, where well more than 12 people were frequenting one of the properties there. You mentioned that, and I'm glad that it picks up existing, so there's no existing use rights with this. So if a property wishes, you said, to have more than what's permitted in the plan, then they'll need a resource consent. Presumably that will be publicly notified, and how widely would that be notified?
Not necessarily. So you've got the standard resource consent process. So an application would come in. If it came in for, the resource consents team would need to assess the application. If they considered that the effects were less than minor, and that may be that there was 13 guests and they had a management plan and the house was located well away from neighbours, it may well not be notified, or it may require only the notification or the written approval of the adjoining neighbours. So it would be assessed on a case by case.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart?
I'm absolutely delighted with the way that you've handled the three scenarios: the in-house manager, the absentee landlord, and the tourist accommodation. You separated them, clearly defined. So I think the issue that Councillor Tapsell brought up, this would be a signal to the Lakeside Zone that this is, if this goes through the public consultation process, comes back pretty much as it's proposed, that will be incorporated, I would think, logically in the Lakeside Zone, because you have got a lot of flexibility. The only one is the holiday rental accommodation. Now, this is not only a problem in Te Hia Tonga, it is a lot of lakeside areas, particularly in Nongataha on Parawai Road and in Ranganui Street, etc., etc. But we've got existing properties there, like Nikau Lodge, which is a registered accommodation lodge, which would have far way more than 20 people at their peak. They have a manager in place, but they also have cottages down the road. So I just wonder how they would be treated. And the other one is, there's no mention in here of our signal to the community that 100% holiday home is 100 days or more. And 100 days per year, neighbours aren't happy with that either, because that means, except for 2 weekends, that property's rented and there have been more than 20 residents. The other one is, in your definition of bed and breakfast, can you either put it in as a titled household unit? because that's where the argument comes in. Oh, we've got 3 dwellings on our certificate of title. We're entitled to 3 lots of bed and breakfasts. But under these rules, I mean, that needs to be more clearly defined, because they're looking at angles to get around it.
Any questions there? Did you get them, Kate?
I might need a help going through. We'll start with the first one. Was that bed and breakfast with multiple houses on one site that you're concerned, or
Yes.
holiday rentals?
The first one we'll deal with B&B first. Yep.
I know with holiday rentals it's per site, 12 per site, not per dwelling.
But when that person who owns that particular site owns 2 adjoining sites,
Yeah.
are they amalgamated into one site, or are they all separate sites? Because that needs to be defined. Because down one driveway they can get 30 cars.
The rules for holiday rentals are per site. So if you purchase one site and then the adjoining site and then the adjoining site, then the rules for holiday rentals, not bed and breakfasts, are a maximum of 12 guests.
Kate, I see Councillor Kent. This is the difficulty of us not being on the Resource Management Committee, but I think it's only finessing so we're clear.
Yes, through you, Your Worship. I think that's covered in the definition of under bed and breakfast. It's guest accommodation provided within a household unit.
Yeah.
Right? The definition is the household unit. So if you've got multiple household units on the same title, there's still multiple units, and each one would apply.
Okay.
We're going to get problems, because under these rules that means 24 people could be on site.
Can I respond back?
Yeah.
So bed and breakfast has a different rule again. That's a maximum of 8 people per bed and breakfast as a permitted activity. Anything more than that requires. Yeah. And from the responses we're getting much more concerns in relation to holiday rentals where you haven't got a manager on site. I'm not aware of significant concerns with bed and breakfast, but that might be just.
And the next question?
It is the holiday rentals that is the issue, where we've covered B&B, they're on site, you've got a manager on site. The big issue in Parawa Road is the holiday rentals where they are not on site. They live in Auckland and everything's done electronically, and 30 or 40 cars are coming down one driveway, and you've got the neighbours next door who will never consent under a resource situation to allow more than the 12.
The policy amended.
Yeah, well, I want to know if they've been involved in this particular. I know that you've been to this property. I just wondered how are you going to handle that under the rules as you propose them?
I haven't been to the property, but I'm aware of where you're talking about. Oh, okay, Kurt has. So some of those properties you've got more than one house on one site, and where they're rented out, where they're advertised for more than 12, then resource consent will be required. It's the one example where you've got, we did some work about whether we should have a rule looking at adjoining sites, and if there's, where you get a situation, accumulative effects. And the outcome of that is that in the majority of instances you'll have more than 12, and so the resource consent, so that will be sufficient to capture it. So we got to the point where it wasn't necessary.
Thank you. We now have Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're all aware of the amount of discussion that's taken place in the media and on social media with regard to some of the people's concerns with this. I just wanted assurance that the marketing that you people are going to put out there is going to capture all those submissions that we want to come in from those people that have been very vocal up till now. I just want to make sure that we word it in such a way that they're actually invited to contribute, and we get a across the board feeling.
So there's the statutory requirements, and they're quite, in this case, we're having to do an awful lot of consultation to make sure that we do get all batch owners and all neighbours that are directly affected. So that'll mean that there's the council magazine coming out, there's a public notice, and there'll be a letter to all ratepayers that are out of district. In-house, there's been a specific email to one of the landowners that are potentially affected here, and an offer to have more informal conversations.
We follow the process. And Councillor Gould?
Madam Chair, with car parking, I take it you allow the users of the property to park on the driveway of that particular property or park on the property. Are you thinking about enforcing where they park outside the property on the road or down the road a bit?
The rules relate to the site only. So there's the requirement in there for every 4 guests to have a car parking space on site. If they're parking off site, that's not something that, as long as they're parking legally, we can't do anything about.
If they park on the verge, it's going to be enforceable.
I think you're going to move into a different enforceability issue under bylaws. This won't affect illegal parking.
You can't wrap it all up. I get you. Right, thank you for the questions, everybody. Yes, Councillor Kent.
If I could just add to that, of course, it becomes a permitted activity provided you are complying with the car parking rule. If you're not complying with the car parking rule, then it's no longer a permitted activity and you've got to go to a resource consent. And under the resource consent, the conditions can include looking at the cumulative effects of adjacent properties and also the car parking stipulations.
Questions I did have was the 100-day threshold. There's no mention of that in the bylaw or in the rules. So this actually, to me, am I wrong in my assessment that this opens up to 7-day-a-week holiday rental accommodation?
No, there are two separate things going on here. The 100-day relates to rating policy and how we'll rate the property in terms of whether it's a commercial activity. So that's nothing to do with this plan change. It's a separate issue.
The recommendation, plan change 6, holiday rentals. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. And well done again. Now this is really showing us, I know it was quite an interesting change this term when we brought in this Resource Management Policy Advisory Committee, but that helps enormously with the build-up work that you are part of and with council officers, so it's helpful to us at the table to get the recommendations and then know the work behind them. Thank you very much. Yes? Nice. Thank you. Right, our next in staff reports is the adoption of Council's annual report for the year 30th of June. Page 115 in your book. I have a mover, Councillor Tapsell, a seconder, Councillor Sturt. All those in favour that we receive the report. Contrary? Carried. Thank you, Thomas. And Thomas, I think you'd better also introduce the team, because you've got Audit New Zealand here and there's I think one new face there that we haven't met, so if you could do that, Thomas, before you start to present the report.
Certainly, Your Worship. So good morning. Yes, I do have a rather large posse with me today. So obviously we all know Callum, and we have Clarence, our Audit Director. Anton is our new Audit Manager this year, and Hamish was the effectively team leader, I understand, with regards to, and did the bulk of the audit work. So I'll just quickly go through the presentation and then we'll have it open to questions at the end, and as usual the auditors are available obviously to answer any questions that you may wish to ask them as well. 2017 was an extremely challenging year for this organisation, it's probably fair to say. So the museum closure in November, right at the peak of the tourist season, contributed to a significant drop in revenue for the organisation. The two storm events that came through in February and March led to significant reinstatement costs with regards to roading infrastructure and stormwater infrastructure, as well as the transition of our waste services to the wheelie bins, which those transition costs while they were more than anticipated, did ensure that the transition was a fairly smooth exercise, I would say, for the majority of our community. In addition to that, we had some significant pressures in our regulatory area, particularly around the building consents and the resource management, which saw us having to lift and increase our staffing levels, in particular to match those demands. So I think as a result, total revenue itself, as you can see, while the fees and charges were behind as a result of the museum, it was slightly offset by the fact that from building consents and such, we're ahead of budget. So overall, revenue did end up ahead of budget, but that was offset by expenditure being over budget, and in particular around the operating expense side, majority of that obviously around those storm events and the transitioning of the waste, the staff expenses, partially as a response to those consenting demands, as well as we had that unfortunate incident with our payroll system towards the end of the year where we unfortunately were understating our staff expenses for a portion of the year. But admin and finance expenses helping offset that as well by those ending the year well under budget, and particularly the finance expense area. So overall, from an operating result, we did end up slightly better than budget. So that was pleasing, but then unfortunately we did start the audit process, and the audit process effectively leads to a significant amount of adjustments at the end of the year, a majority of them which are considered non-cash. And so what we did do is we obviously take that operating surplus, and then we introduced new assets that were found as a result of the revaluation process. So we reinstated assets that may have been written off in previous years and then reinstated. We cleared out our work in progress. Our work in progress is really the bucket that holds a fair portion of our capital expenditure over the years, and as that expenditure gets to a point and is able to be capitalised as in turned into an asset, we then move it out of work in progress and recognise it as an asset. This year we have written off about $6 million. So bear with me, Councillor Gould. I know these figures are rounded. They're not quite precise, but I have rounded these to make it a little bit simpler. As well as that, we did an impairment of some intangibles, and that was the intellectual property around our T-Rex investment. There was an additional $1.2 million of work in progress that was expensed during the year, so that was expenditure during last year that technically wouldn't have resulted in an asset, so therefore was recognised as an expense instead, an operating expense. And then the usual loss on disposal of assets, and we had some other couple of adjustments as well as of about $200,000 resulting from the audit process. So overall, therefore, you take that $566,000 management operating surplus, like for like with our annual plan, with regards to how we budget. We do those adjustments, and then we come down to a $6.8 million deficit. That, of course, the majority of those are non-cash adjustments, are then offset by fair value adjustments and in particular revaluation gains. And those revaluation gains are obviously the revaluation of our infrastructure assets, and I think the big one this year was, I can't remember what.
Sorry, buildings?
Yeah, buildings, and I think stormwater, or yeah. And so overall that contributed to a $53 million increase, which resulted in, at the bottom line, if you look at your statement of comprehensive revenue and expenditure, which is effectively your profit and loss statement, there's a $47 million surplus. Obviously the bulk of that is tied to those revaluation gains. On top of that, so from an operating perspective, it was very tough, but we ended up the year okay prior to those end of year adjustments. From the capital expenditure side, we had an extremely high completion rate. We did have expenditure pulled forward, so the Children's Health Hub pulled forward expenditure from previous future years. We had the museum storage acquisition, which was unbudgeted. And on top of that, we had an extremely high completion rate around our renewals as well. So that, along with our operating result, put us under a significant amount of pressure. And as a result, council debt, unfortunately, did have to increase as a result. So in a year that we planned on not to borrow, our borrowing did increase at a group level from $165.6 million to $168.7 million. So that's a $3.1 million increase overall. I'll just briefly talk about financial prudence measures. So these are the measures that were introduced, I think, back in 2014 on the back of the Department of Internal Affairs. And the benchmarks are included in our long-term plan, and they're also included in our annual reports, but sometimes they are forgotten about and glossed over. But really those measures are really there for benchmarks to enable a member of the community to make an assessment as to whether council is prudently managing its financial dealings. And the reason why I'm talking about these is that while I just talked about we did have a challenging year, and obviously we did borrow, when you do look at some of these measures, the picture isn't quite maybe as bad as some people may think. So if you look at the balanced budget, unfortunately, while at an operating level we did have a balanced budget, by the time we had to take into account that, in particular, that $6 million write-down of that work in progress, we only ended the year at 94%. So from an operating perspective, yes, we did still manage to balance our budget, but unfortunately that did impact. And you can see there a comparison of how we went against the previous year. So it was a little bit disappointing that we couldn't achieve the 100%, but I think in light of what's happened with regards to the museum closure and those end-of-year adjustments, it's probably no surprise that we didn't quite manage to hit 100% with regards to balancing our budget. The operations control benchmark, that's really about the cash flow that we expect to generate to help pay for our capital expenditure. And you'll see there in previous years, we've never hit 100% for a while. We were probably on track this year to do that. But obviously because of the impact that the museum in particular had around our operating revenues, we didn't generate the operating revenues we expected, so therefore as a result we didn't generate those cash flows from operations either, so that had that flow-on effect as well. So those were probably the two that were unfortunately, we aimed to get to 100% this year, but we through circumstances weren't able to. But I think the pleasing one is if you look therefore at our essential services benchmark, and this was one that I think in previous year there was some concern about because we weren't at 100%. If you look at 2014 and 15, those were the years where we had to respond to the financial issues that this organisation had, and we had to constrain our capital spend to make sure that our debt wasn't growing at an exponential rate. Last year we didn't achieve 100%, in particular off the back of there were some really key projects that were delayed or stopped partway through the year. And even as an example, very little stormwater renewals done, waiting on the modelling, and that impacted it. I think this year, as you can see, back over 100%, so it's very pleasing to see that we have invested it into particularly our network infrastructure. The second one is debt of affordability, which is so while unfortunately debt has gone up, what this measure does is it shows how we sit against our 175% ceiling that we've imposed on ourselves. And as you can see, from 2013 to 14, it did increase, reduced over 2016, and while debt has increased by 3.1 million across the group, we still have a significant amount of headroom available to us for future capital projects. Debt servicing benchmark, so how are we able to service that debt, and what percentage of our revenues I guess is being used to pay for that. So it's very pleasing that over those first 3 years on that graph, it did slowly increase, and then over the last 2 years we've managed to pull down the cost of borrowing in particular, and I think our average cost of borrowing now is below 4.5%, which is a very good position to be. So the credit rating obviously has helped significantly with regards to reducing the borrowing costs. We were able to restructure a lot of debt straight after the initial credit rating, which saw us make some significant savings, and that has continued to benefit us in this last year and will continue to benefit us going forward. And then with regards to the debt control benchmark, and what this does is it looks at the long-term plan and where we thought our debt would be at this time of year, and then compares where we actually are. And so obviously through 14, 15 and 16 there was a bit of a drop because we planned debt to be a lot higher, but we actually reduced debt over those years, or held debt, and then with that increase that we've had this year, it has brought us closer to where our LTP for we would be. So but still I think the pleasing thing is below where we anticipated to be in our long-term plan. So with that, Any questions or?
Discussion, especially as we've got the Office of Audit here. I just will also ask, you mentioned the cost of audit to council. It was one of the costs. I was a bit shocked at the figure you put up there.
No, I didn't. But the cost of audits is a six-figure sum. Yes, it's a reasonable figure. Right. It's a quite lengthy piece of work with a lot of staff. Yeah. And
did it require more work that actually impacted on the cost?
We're about to have a discussion on that with our audit director on the fees. I think there is some healthy tension there to lift the fee. I think this year around there was probably a significant amount of additional work around our fixed assets once again. I think a lot of our issues in the past were resolved, and it was able to go deeper and deeper, and more was found that had to be rectified. So that did probably lead to some additional resource, which we'll have a talk about how that's paid for.
Okay, and the other issue, and you just touched on it really, because that's quite a rapid run through for us, but the impact of the unforeseen, particularly with climate change and adverse weather effects. Can you round up what the cost of that has been to us in that financial year? Because with the local government New Zealand travelling roadshow, they're very interested in, debt, borrowing, etc., but they're also becoming more and more sharpened about the impact of climate change on our balance sheet.
Yeah, those two storm events impacted us about $600,000 in total, and I think the difficulty for us was that if they had have occurred earlier in the year, you would be in a position to be able to review your programs and change your programs to try and fit those sorts of costs in. But because they did happen 3 quarters through the financial year, it was very difficult for us therefore to respond to try and absorb those costs.
Any other questions? We'll go round the table. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's disappointing to know that we have an increase for the debt, Thomas, but I see that you've kept it to an absolute minimum given the unfortunate weather events that we have experienced. What sort of value did the sale of assets contribute to keeping it down to 3.1 million in property sales, etc.?
Property sales contributed 2 million last year, so we planned on budgeted for 1, but we did achieve I think 2.1 in the end.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, not a question, but a comment. I still again raise the issue of the requirement under the relevant Act for councils to operate within their revenue. It horrifies me that even though we've had $600,000 storm events and $1 million unexpected museum contingency, that we are still operating with our expenditure exceeding our income by 6.8 million. And if you look back on page 32, this has been going on every year that we see here. This has to be addressed going forward, and it has to be addressed in the long-term plan. It is time this council started operating within its revenue. Contingencies will always come along. We have to allow for that in our forward planning, and I would ask the Chief Executive to address that here on. We can't do anything going backwards, but we can going forwards.
I'm sure there's a good response from Thomas there. We've just been working through the balanced budget approach, so it's not just about...
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. 6.8 million deficit in operating expenditure is not a balanced budget in anyone's book.
Thomas would... Yes.
I'm more than happy to answer your
Thomas
worship.
Will answer.
So, as I explained, look, I'll go back a little bit as well.
We do this every year, we explain this.
Yeah, and that's... Yeah. So when we set the budget, obviously we set the budget, and the budget for the last financial year was a balanced budget. As we went through the year, we got impacted significantly by, in particular, 2 events that put us under immense pressure. So, museum revenues being down 1.5 million, without the museum actually able to reduce its costs to offset that, obviously puts the organisation under immense strain. On top of that, the transition costs and all the rest. So we had planned to work towards offsetting those, and I think as I showed you previously at the start, from an operating level, we were balanced, as you can see here. So we budgeted $83,000 surplus as per the annual plan, and we ended up on about $566,000. I think, Councillor, what you don't like and what you need to recognise is that some of these adjustments that have come through are the clearance of work in progress and the expensing of capital items, which you just don't budget for because you can't budget for. And also these are items that have been recognised in the annual report elsewhere in previous years, but this is the accountants and the auditors coming through and correcting things and tidying things up as we go through. It is very hard for me to budget for this. However, if the council and the community does wish me to do that, I'm more than happy to take an estimate and budget for this, but obviously we'd have to look to fund that as well.
I wondered, Clarence, if you'd like to answer this. I think every year we get you to the table at the annual report. There seems to be a misunderstanding by one councillor, but it's legitimate to ask questions today. Clarence.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I mean, what Councillor Kent is saying is really important, and it must be addressed through the LTP process. When you look at our previous LTP audit opinion, and when we presented that, we did say that over the 10 years, you are at risk of not achieving your balanced budget if your subsidies and grants didn't match your capital expenditure. Now, in the last 6 years, yes, with all the one-offs that occurred, there was the additional write-offs that meant that the expenditure was more than the revenue. So I agree with what Councillor Kent is saying about looking at it in more detail going into the next LTP round, and also considering how to factor in contingencies for climate change and that sort of thing. Maybe I know some of the other councils have sort of a contingent fund that they have available. It all depends on your total rating and that sort of thing.
My question before Councillor Sturt, how many more deep dives do we need, you know, in terms of audit satisfaction?
It's not about just audit satisfaction. It is around the underlying information, your asset management plans and your asset systems. I must say huge improvements has been made in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And that's why we had all these cleanups with the things like your work in progress coming through, and also some changes in direction of projects decided not to go ahead, which have an impact on your profit and loss. Where if it would have been a project that would have been completed, it would have been capitalized and then depreciated.
Stay at the table, Clarence, just in case there's another question that stops you bobbing up and down. Councillor Sturt.
If we could just look at the previous slide. Am I reading this correctly? Our revenue was up 2.3 million. Our expenditure was up 1.893 million. This is our profit and loss and trading account.
That's right.
This is our reserves and our cash, etc., etc. So we actually achieved a surplus on budget of $483,000. Okay, it was then adjusted to $566,000 on the next slide, and some other book entry adjustments were made to show that the bottom line of the fixed assets is 47.789 million. So we, in the past, I've been around this place a long time, used to have contingency funds. Those contingency funds were in a silo that built up and built up and built up and built up, sometimes into the millions of dollars. And then audit would say, well, why are you continually putting money into contingency when you've already got a fund? So about 10 years ago, we took the conscious decision of saying we would not run with contingency funds. We would mitigate the risk when the risk occurred. And we've been unlucky with a couple of events that have occurred with the Art and History Museum and weather events. The other thing is, so I'm reading that right. The profit and loss shows that we were on budget, even though we had a whole lot of events that impacted us. What I'm more interested in is the Regional Development Fund coming up in $1 billion. What I want to know is, are we going to be ready to take advantage of, because Rotorua will be at the forefront with the forestry development and also some regional development funding that will be coming our way. But that, I believe, will probably be in a partnership role. So I think in our LTP coming up, we need to be light on our feet in terms of reacting to those changes. So
probably not the annual plan.
No, I know, but I thought I'd throw that in anyway. But can you respond? Am I reading this right, that we have got a budgeted surplus? You, through your audit process, have realised that in past years certain things have not been attended to from a book point of view, and that there's still the 2016-17 operating surplus was $566,000.
If you go back one slide, you'll see that you have capital subsidies that's recognized as revenue in the year that you receive that and you do your capital project. But your depreciation will be over the life of that asset. So when you read it like that, yes, it is. That was the risk that was identified in the LTP, that if the timing of your capital subsidies did not match your LTP, then it was difficult to have a balanced budget.
Hunt?
Just a question for you, Thomas. The deficit of 6,820, is that on line with other years, that adjustment? And if you were to say, well, I'll make a prediction and we'd rate for that, there'd be significant impact to that. Exactly. So is that a usual figure? Is it an outlier over the past, I don't know, half a dozen years?
No, it's been a little bit consistent. If anything, probably in the last few years, it's ramped up because we have been doing a lot of deep dives into the fixed assets and done a lot of tidying up. So with the significant clearance of work in progress this year, I don't anticipate seeing anything at that level going forward. But the challenge for the organisation is making sure that that the work that we do and look to capitalise does end up being an asset and does not result in having to be expensed at the end of the year. And I think that's the challenge for us going forward. But I'd say going forward next year, I'd be pretty disappointed if we saw figures like that again going forward.
Supplementary to that, then ideally that we would end up with a very few things needing that adjustment once we have done all that tidy up, and they really would truly be outliers.
Yes and no, because I think every year as well, every time we go dive into revaluation of assets and so forth, when you're talking about $1.3 billion worth of assets, you're always going to find things to tidy up. So you will always have write-offs or impairments or adjustments. The plan is obviously not to have them at this level as we become better and smarter at those sorts of things as well.
Because it's what we don't know that audit does expose, and I can see the process, but we should be comforted that you're getting that in order. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. That was my only question, really, was that 6 million figure of write-off in previous years, so assets that have popped up that we had previously written off, they popped up through revaluation. Was that what you said? And could you give me an example of an asset that's been written off and then reinstated that we didn't know about it? How does that happen?
A lot of it can happen in the infrastructure side around water pipes and so forth, and that from an accounting perspective, it may be at the end of its economic life in 1 year, and so therefore it's back at zero, and then in future years when they're revalued, it may, and condition assess, you may actually find that actually the asset isn't there and it needs to be there, and then you'd end up reinstating it. So that's a reinstatement example. A write-off would be an example of a community house being demolitioned, for example. So you went from an asset of, it might have had a book value of $500,000 to zero, so there's a good example as well. Through to anything with regards to, you may do some work around creating a physical asset, so you may, what's a good example? Well, T-Rex, I guess, is a good example there. We did do a significant of work designing a plant that would interact with our wastewater treatment plant, and then with the decline in the waste management, the MFE application, as well as the change in direction with regards to where that wastewater treatment plant needs to go with the new resource consent. That project was put on hold, and I guess over the years we've been having discussions with the auditors as to whether it will lead to an asset or not. And with regards to where that project is currently, you would say it currently isn't leading to an asset, so therefore you do write that expenditure off. Now in the future, if that does lead to T-Rex being built, if council ever does decide that, then you would just look to reinstate that as well. So, but from an accounting perspective, you kind of look at it and say, at the moment it doesn't fit within creating a physical asset, so therefore we would look to impair it and write it down.
And just supplementary through you, Your Worship, so will the new information systems that we're implementing, will they assist in tidying this all up going forward?
Yes, but also bear in mind that this is just part of the usual end of year process as well. It's just as we've progressed over the last few years, we've just gotten better and better and tidier in that area. So this is probably, hopefully, the last of the big clean outs now. Yep.
Madam Chair, I've got 3 questions. First one is Thomas, your comments on the climate change and storm damage of 600,000 K. I believe that figure covers up until the 30th of June, because with the storms from March, April and May, we've got a number of roads and slips which have been still waiting to be fixed, and I believe that figure in these storm damage should increase this year by at least $1 million. That's the first question.
So yeah, the 600,000 I mentioned only related to this financial year, and Stavros could probably be in a better position to answer what that figure is overall, but it may be in the ballpark of what you've suggested. Stavros is nodding, so yes, there you go.
One question is to do with your actual and budget figures. When your depreciation went up by 209,000, your operating expenses went up by 2,599,000, and yet I would have expected that depreciation should have gone up more than 209,000. Cost increase on your operating.
So, Councillor, I'll probably spend a little bit of time with you in the back after the meeting and explain how depreciation doesn't have an impact on operating expenses. So those two are unfortunately a little bit disconnected from each other. But I'll talk to you about that after. Yep.
Third question is to do with Stella. All councillors have got the annual report, adoption of the council's annual report in the Stella program. This covers 200 pages. On page 200, the auditor's report is blank. So does that mean we as councillors will get a copy of that, or is that covered in recommendation number 1 on page 115, number 4, that the Chief Executive be authorised to make minor...
Councillor Gould.
So Councillor, it always is empty at this time of year because Clarence has just pulled it out of his compendium. So what happens is the moment that you approve and adopt the annual report, he hands me the copy of the audit opinion, at which point we scan it into the document and go.
As you see in the recommendation, we sign the letters. Yeah. I don't think your questions actually reflect fairly the amount of work that audit has been working right up until this very meeting today. So you will get the report. We'll all get the report.
I'll respond. If I don't get to see a copy of the auditor's report, then why should I approve the report?
Look, in previous years, I think we may have been able to put the draft opinion in without it signed. We never have the signed opinion to put in because it is proper protocol with regards to we adopt, they hand it to us. It's not the other way around, unfortunately.
And that's process.
Yeah. I think with regards to the actual audit opinion, while the audit itself took a little bit longer because of the deep dives that did occur, there are no significant issues, and I'm not aware of anything being flagged in the audit opinion, Clarence, but yeah, Clarence can comment on that.
Yeah, no, we've got a modified audit opinion that we will hand over.
Parents, and it's nice to have you here. I think that's the process we all need to understand and learn and respect. It's a process. And we are here discussing today, and you've got the auditor here who's got his opinion. Right, are there any further questions? I'm going to put then that 2, 3 and 4, that Council resolves to adopt the audited annual report and the audited summary, that the Mayor and Chief Executive be authorised to sign the letter of representation of compliance in the Statement of Compliance section, and that the Chief Executive be authorised to make minor editorial changes, if any, as agreed with Council's auditors. Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Kent. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you, and thank you, the audit team, and the relationship that you're building now with Rotorua Lakes Council. And thank you to the staff, Thomas and your staff, and Callum, who have got to this stage today. Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Tapsell. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. We'll have a 5-minute break while we clear the room.